In 1896, every map in every European capital painted Africa in colonial colors. Britain owned the north and the south. France owned the west. Belgium owned the heart of the continent. Portugal, Germany, and Spain divided what remained. The scramble for Africa was not a war. It was a banquet, and Africa was the meal. But one man, one king, looked at that banquet table, looked at the guests seated around it, and said, his name was Menelik II, Emperor of Ethiopia, and what he did next shook the entire world. By the late 19th century, Europe's imperial project had become the most audacious land grab in human history. The Berlin Conference of 1884 had divided the entire African continent among European powers, without a single African voice in the room. Within a decade, over 90% of Africa was under European control. Italy was late to the feast. Having only unified as a nation in 1861, it was a young, ambitious, and hungry empire, desperate to prove itself on the world stage. It set its sights on the Horn of Africa. It set its sights on Ethiopia. What Italy did not understand, what no European power seemed willing to accept, was that Ethiopia was not available. It was ancient, it was organized, it was armed, and it was led by a man who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this moment. Stay with us until the end of this story, because what Menelik II did in his darkest hour will permanently change how you understand the word courage. If you are new here, subscribe now. We tell the stories history tried to bury. Saleh Mariam, the man who would become Menelik II, was born on August 17, 1844, in the town of Angalala in the Shewa region of Ethiopia. He was of royal blood, a direct descendant of the legendary Solomonic dynasty, the ancient line of kings that traced its ancestry to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. In Ethiopia, this lineage was not mythology, it was identity, it was mandate. His childhood was not peaceful. At the age of 11, after his father, King Haile Molucot of Shewa, died in 1855, the boy was taken captive by Emperor Tiwadros II, not out of cruelty, but as a political hostage, a guarantee that Shewa would remain loyal to the imperial crown. He spent 10 years in the mountain fortress of Magdala, watched, controlled, educated, but never broken. In 1865, at the age of 21, Saleh Mariam escaped. He returned to Shewa, claimed his father's throne, and began building. Slowly, methodically, with the patience of a man who understood that power was not seized in a single moment, it was constructed over years. Over the next 2 decades, Menelik expanded Shewa through diplomacy, strategic marriages, and carefully chosen military campaigns. He modernized his army. He imported rifles from Europe, understanding with remarkable foresight that the only way to resist European military technology was to acquire it. He purchased weapons from France, from Italy, and from Russia. He built roads. He established a new capital, Addis Ababa, meaning New Flower, in 1886, a city that still stands as Ethiopia's capital today.
By 1889, Emperor Johannes IV died in battle against the Mahdists of Sudan. The imperial throne was open. Menelik decisively claimed the crown and became emperor of all Ethiopia. He was 44 years old. He had a modern army. He had a strategic mind sharpened by decades of court politics and battlefield experience. And he had a determination rooted in his blood and his faith that Ethiopia would never be owned by another power. Europe was about to find all of this out the hard way. Italy had been involved in the Horn of Africa since the 1880s, establishing a colonial foothold in Eritrea along the Red Sea coast. In 1889, the same year Menelik became emperor, the two nations signed a treaty. It was called the Treaty of Wuchale. On its surface, it appeared to be a diplomatic agreement between two sovereign nations, establishing trade relations and mutual recognition. But the treaty had a poison inside it. Article 17 of the Treaty of Wuchale existed in 2 versions, one in Italian, one in Amharic. In the Italian version, the article stated that Ethiopia was obliged to conduct all foreign affairs through the Italian government. In the Amharic version, the same article stated that Ethiopia may, if it chooses, use Italy as an intermediary in foreign affairs. One word, one grammatical shift from obligation to option, and Italy had manufactured a legal claim to make Ethiopia an Italian protectorate. When the Italian government informed the European powers that Ethiopia was now an Italian protectorate, Menelik read the treaty carefully. He understood exactly what had been done. And in 1893, he formally renounced the Treaty of Wuchale entirely. He then did something extraordinary. He wrote directly to the heads of state of Europe, to Queen Victoria of Britain, to the President of France, to the Tsar of Russia, informing them clearly that Ethiopia was an independent nation, that it had never agreed to become a protectorate of Italy, and that it would defend its sovereignty by whatever means necessary. Italy's response was military. It began advancing troops from Eritrea into northern Ethiopia, occupying territory and establishing fortifications, fully expecting Menelik to negotiate from weakness, to capitulate as so many African rulers before him had been forced to do. Menelik did not negotiate. He mobilized. The call went out across Ethiopia. Warriors came from every corner of the empire, from Tigray in the north, from Oromo in the south, from Shewa, from Harar, from Gondar. By the time Menelik's army assembled, it numbered over 100,000 soldiers. It was equipped with modern rifles, artillery pieces, and an organizational structure that shocked European military observers, who had assumed they were dealing with tribal irregulars. Empress Tetu Batul, Menelik's formidable wife, marched with the army personally. She led 12,000 soldiers of her own, commanded artillery, and was a strategic voice in every major council of war. History has not always given her the recognition she deserves, but the soldiers who fought at Adwa knew, behind the emperor stood an empress with iron in her spine. General Oreste Baratieri commanded the Italian forces. He had approximately 17,000 men, professional European soldiers, modern artillery, the full technological backing of a nation-state. He believed the Ethiopian forces were disorganized, poorly armed, and incapable of sustained military coordination. He was wrong on every count.
In January 1896, the Italian government in Rome, frustrated by the military stalemate and facing political pressure at home, sent Baratieri a direct message: advance or be replaced. It was the order that sealed Italy's fate. On the night of February 29th into March 1st, 1896, Baratieri ordered his 4 brigades to advance through the mountain passes toward Adwa under cover of darkness. The plan was to seize high ground before dawn and force Menelik into a confrontation on Italian terms. The plan collapsed almost immediately. The Italian maps of the Ethiopian terrain were catastrophically inaccurate. Mistranslations of local names had rendered them nearly useless. In the darkness of the mountain passes, the 4 brigades separated. They lost communication with one another. They advanced at different speeds through different valleys, and by the time dawn broke on March 1st, 1896, the Italian army was fragmented, isolated in hostile terrain, and completely exposed. Menelik had known they were coming. His intelligence network, built through local knowledge, loyal scouts, and a population that defended its land, had tracked the Italian movements through the night. At dawn, he unleashed his forces. The Battle of Adwa lasted approximately 6 hours. The Ethiopians attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, using the terrain they had known since childhood, pressing the isolated Italian brigades before they could regroup. General Vittorio d'Abramida's brigade was surrounded and destroyed. General Giuseppe Allena's column was driven back with catastrophic losses. General Vittorio Baldissera, commanding the reserve, could not reach the forward brigades in time. By noon, the Italian army had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Approximately 7,000 Italian soldiers were killed, the largest defeat of a European army by an African force in the entire history of the colonial era. Another 1,500 were wounded. Nearly 2,000 were taken prisoner. General Baratieri fled the battlefield. He was later court-martialed. The Ethiopian losses were also significant. Somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 men died at Adwa. Victory was not without its cost, but it was victory, absolute, undeniable, and historic. The news reached Rome on March 3, 1896. The Italian government fell within days. Prime Minister Francesco Crispi, the architect of Italy's Ethiopian ambitions, resigned in disgrace. The streets of Rome saw protests. The parliament erupted. For Italy, Adwa was not simply a military defeat. It was a national humiliation of the deepest kind. Proof, broadcast to every capital in Europe, that the project of African colonization was not as inevitable as they had all believed.
For the rest of the world, and particularly for people of African descent, Adwa was something entirely different. It was proof that the system of European colonial dominance could be broken. News of the Ethiopian victory spread across Africa, the Americas, and the Caribbean. In the United States, African-American newspapers ran full front-page coverage. In the Caribbean, poets wrote about Menelik. In West Africa, his name became a symbol of what resistance could achieve. On October 26, 1896, Italy signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa. In it, Italy unconditionally recognized Ethiopia as a fully independent sovereign state. The Treaty of Wachile, the fraudulent document that had started the entire crisis, was annulled. Italy was required to pay an indemnity of 10 million lire. The Italian prisoners of war were released. Ethiopia had fought, Ethiopia had won, and Ethiopia had made Europe sign a piece of paper admitting it. Menelik II continued to rule Ethiopia until illness diminished his capacity in his final years. He suffered a series of strokes beginning around 1909 and died on December 12, 1913, at the age of 69. By the time of his death, he had more than tripled the size of Ethiopia through diplomacy and military campaigns. He had built the first modern hospital in the country, established the Bank of Ethiopia, constructed the country's first railway line, and created the infrastructure of a modern state. He had also done something no political leader can manufacture. He had become a symbol, a proof of possibility, a demonstration written in blood on the mountain passes of Adwa that sovereignty was not something Europe could simply take from a people who refused to surrender it. In the decades that followed the Battle of Adwa, Ethiopia remained the only African nation, alongside Liberia, to retain its independence through the entire colonial era. When the African Union was founded in 1963, it chose Addis Ababa as its permanent home. Not by accident, because Addis Ababa was the city Menelik built, because Ethiopia was the country that proved it could be done. The colonial era eventually ended. The empires that carved up Africa at the Berlin Conference, the empires that fully expected Menelik II to bend his knee, those empires are gone. Their flags came down, their governors went home. But on the slopes above Adwa, there is still the memory of a morning when 100,000 Ethiopians looked at the most powerful military forces the 19th century could assemble and charged. History is full of men who bowed when the pressure came, who signed the treaty with the poison clause, who accepted the protectorate status to survive another day. Most of them have been forgotten, absorbed into the footnotes of the empires that consumed them. Menelik II refused, and 129 years later, we still speak his name. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel, because history did not end at Adwa. There are more stories like this one, buried under the version of history we were taught in school, and we are going to tell every single one of them.